All right, folks, we're going to talk today. My name is Brian Kilcourse about what retailers need to be focusing on right now in 2022. We've got a fun panel there. You see three faces, but there's actually four of us. And one set of cameras isn't quite working, but we'll get through that. And what we're just going to do first is talk a little bit about our panelists. So I'm going to start in the order that I can see you. Gary, how about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your company, what you do there.
All right, thanks, Brian. So my name's Gary Sankary. I am with Esri. I'm the retail industry expert here. So I help evangelize our software and our value proposition to retailers, and also, to be honest, spend a lot of time taking that business, what the retailers are thinking about and evangelizing that back to all of the folks at Esri. So if you're not familiar with Esri, we are the world's largest provider of geospatial analytics, mapping, and geospatial data. And we spend a lot of time working with retailers, helping them understand why things happen where they do, and try to understand how things change within the physical environments and the markets where they work.
Now, Gary, you're not telling us a little bit about your retail history. You have a rich history as a retailer, so spill the beans.
That's you're too kind. So I did spend almost 30 years at Target in a number of different executive roles. My last one was working on a gigantic 2-year ERP acquisition. And the good news was it gave me really good insight into all of the various operating tools that merchandising was using, and not just the tools, but really the processes that they were trying to support and the capabilities that they were trying to enable.
Now, Gary, just for another second, you and I have been working together. You and RSR have been working together for, I think, going on 5 years now.
Yeah.
And we've been studying the state of location analytics in retail. I'm struck by the fact that 5 years ago, when we first asked the question, the response we got generally was, say that again? What do you mean by that? But there's been a very, very fast transition from, let's call it skepticism to impatience as it comes to location analytics. Isn't that true?
Yeah, and I think what really drives that is retailers. I think it's twofold. First of all, when I came over here, and when I joined Esri, I really didn't know anything about what we did. But when I started to understand that relationship between localization and business execution, it's like, intuitively, we all know that this is something we wanted to do. We've always wanted to build store-specific assortments, but we've always struggled with what was the data that we needed to be able to do that. And I think, especially, we're going to talk about post-COVID, and I believe very strongly, COVID really didn't expose anything new, but it accelerated a lot of things that we were kind of thinking about. And one of those things certainly was localization, and both from a monitoring the health of the communities and trying to understand what stores and what things were happening, to supply chain issues, to really realizing that if I can engage customers with product and messaging that's relevant to them where they are, that's going to become that they're much more likely to convert those messages, and build a much more loyal customer base.
Well, we're going to talk an awful lot about that as we go forward. That's a really interesting topic, but it does bring me to Ashley. Ashley, tell us a little bit about yourself and your company, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Brian, and apologies again. My webcam seems to have taken an unapproved vacation day, so apologies for everyone. But Ashley Burkle, so I'm the Director of Business Development focused on retail with Impinj. And so my background is also in retail and consumer goods. For the past 15 years, I've focused on technology and enterprise systems with retailers, and definitely had the pleasure of working with some top brands to help them transform. And today I get to do that with Impinj. So Impinj is an industry leader in IoT connectivity, and we specifically focus on brain RFID, which is the passive RFID that is typically associated with retail. So what's inside swing tickets and sticker labels, and even today embedded into garments. And our platform enables retailers to connect billions of items to improve inventory accuracy and visibility, as well as seeing more adoption around use cases like loss prevention and self-checkout and supply chain automation. So Impinj's platform gives everyday items a digital life with RFID, and I'm very excited to be here today. So thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a real pleasure, Ashley. I was thinking about you. Full disclosure, first of all, to our audience, RSR is conducting a study on IoT and retail that's expected to be published sometime in mid-April, and our sponsor is Impinj. So thank you for that, Ashley. But you know, it's a real hot topic, not least of which is driven by the fact that Walmart once again is very aggressively pursuing an item level RFID tagging initiative. Is that driving interest in the industry because of their announcements?
Absolutely. I think anytime you've got a large retailer, a market mover like a Walmart come out and so publicly talk about adopting a technology and the importance of that technology, it obviously brings other retailers to want to understand more about the technology, but also brings other retailers into having to be a part of that adoption and that technology. So definitely more and more questions, and all very positive.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know we'll get a chance to talk about that, but of course you can see the relationship between what your company does and what Gary's does. We're going to take it in a slightly different direction now by introducing Brian, the other Brian in this call. Brian, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your company?
Yeah, great. So yeah, thanks, Brian, to be here, and great to be on the panel with Ashley and Gary. So yeah, I'm Brian McGlynn. I'm the head of our e-commerce and web line of business at Coveo. The company, in a nutshell, what we do is we're a data and AI driven platform that focuses on driving relevancy and customer experiences. So commerce, people that are pre-purchase, post-purchase, the whole idea of really boosting revenue and increasing profit, reducing returns, increasing customer satisfaction. So all those measures where people interact through digital channels. And that's what we do. And how I came here, been in through the last 20 years in the digital customer experience and AI space. So even before we kind of stopped calling AI, we started calling it AI again. Was involved with that with the likes of working with many different software companies along the lines, the likes of Interwoven, Autonomy, and Intershop. So from there, happy to join Coveo, and I saw the need, certainly as a platform provider, to really differentiate against the likes of Amazon and the others by providing the curated experience, but really a one-to-one customized experience for people as they're shopping online and even in store as they bring up their devices and go digital. So it's really a big part where we look at it, how we can drive and ultimately make things relevant and increase the impact with it. So yeah, really happy to be here today.
Well, it's great to have you, Brian. And again, full disclosure to the audience, we did a state of e-commerce and retail study that just came out last month, and the sponsor was Coveo. But one of the things we found in that study was that so many people now begin their shopping journeys in the digital space. And so the need for recognizing who those people are and what problem they're trying to solve is really, really important. But more than that, I was thinking of the connection between the three of you and your companies. And it has to do with the digitization, if I can say that word, digitalization of the retail space, and how that is impacting everything that we're doing. So we'll get into that in just a minute. What I want to do, though, first is I want to take a couple of minutes and just share RSR's point of view in summary about what's going on in 2022. So Steve, if you could just flip one more slide. Take it one more. There we go. We're going to talk a little bit about what the general, let's call them overarching themes that are happening in retail. And first of all, we all know, and Gary said this perfectly, the pandemic certainly accelerated retailer acceptance of a true omni-channel selling environment. We saw this very clearly. Interestingly enough, in 2019, when we did a study on the state of e-commerce, retailers still viewed omni-channel from start to finish, from order creation to order fulfillment, as a nice to have. But in just a very, very short space of time, it became a survival necessity. Now we see that over 60% of all the shopping journeys are starting in the digital domain. By the way, that's not RSR's data, that's Google's data. And we have some fun tidbits for you can share in the study if you want to read it. But in fact, retailers don't realize how extensive that behavior is, and it's impacting their business in a big way. The second one is certainly that the new center of gravity as a result of all this is really the whole customer order creation and management process. Now, what I mean by this is the store, and particularly when it relates to technology, the point of sale system itself was kind of ground zero for retail and retail information. In the days when we based all of our decisions based on item movement through the register, that was good enough. And in 1989 and 1990, that's all we could do. But things have changed dramatically now. The consumer has digitized. They are using their iPhones, they're using their iPads, they're using their desktops to do a lot of their shopping online, and we need to engage with them at a very early point, even when they intend to finish their shopping journey in a store. So it's really driving a lot of change. The next one is interesting. The role of the store as a result of all of this is it's truly become a node, if you will, in an omni-channel, a peer-to-peer omni-channel selling environment. And that is also changing the role of the store employee. I'm not sure we're going to get a chance to talk about that today. It's an interesting subject, and it's one that we're certainly going to study in 2022. The next one, Steve. One of the really interesting outcomes from all of this, and Brian, I'm sure you're going to have a lot to say about this, is that retailers are really challenged to put forward a value proposition for consumers when they start their journeys in a ubiquitous digital world. We saw another piece of data from another one of your competitors just yesterday that said that in the digital world, that price and availability is it. It's the only value proposition that matters. We reject that notion. That seems to be the default, but it does raise the question if the digital world needs to have more nuanced value offers, what are those nuanced values that we need to provide for them? So let's go on to the next one, Steve. Finally, let's talk about the supply chain for a second. One of the questions we're going to dive into today is the supply chain shock of 2021, is it over or is it worse? We'll talk a little bit about that, but one of the things that really hit retailers over the head is they need much greater visibility into the supply side of their business, as well as a need for a much more agile response to sudden changes in either supply or demand. So these are all gigantic changes on the selling side, on the buying side, and on all the operational processes that live in the middle. But in spite of all of that, a lot of retailers in 2021 made a lot of money. It was a really great year for a lot of retailers. And so in spite of these significant operational and process challenges, retailers still found a way to make money. The question is, can they keep doing it? So we're going to dive into some of those things, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So at this point, let's talk. I have one more data point. Thanks, Steve, for reminding me. This is from a study we did last year, and we wanted to know what retailers thought about all of these expectations. One of the things you see in our studies is that retail winners over performers tend to think of different things than average and underperformers do, and this was a very interesting slide from that perspective. Retail winners have a much, if you will, a much sharper focus on several issues. First of all, the consumer expectations for more satisfying shopping experience require more labor. The growth in consumer omnichannel has triggered a reassessment of the role of the stores. We just talked about that. Supporting a more localized store assortment and presentation is increasingly important. That gets to your point, Gary. Emerging cross-channel fulfillment requirements are causing us to rethink our supply chain design. Think of the implications of that statement. And finally, the global supply chain uncertainties have caused us to reconsider new sourcing strategies. These are all huge issues, all of them the result of what happened in 2020 and 2021. So now let's talk. We've run up some broad questions, and we're going to talk around them. So if you just bring up the next one, Steve, we'll leave that up, and we'll just chat around these issues during the course of the conversation. But the very first question, kind of to kick off the discussion, is what is the role of the store in this new world? Is it in the process of being redefined, or is it continuing this notion of what you lose in the, or what you gain in the digital domain, you lose in the physical domain? So Brian, you're in the digital domain, so I'll ask you the question first. Is it a zero-sum thing? Is it something that when you gain a customer in the digital space, you lose them in the physical space?
I think actually they are inextricably linked, and that's the thing that I certainly look at and how much of it's gone into. You think about it from today, modern shopper looking to buy something, first thing they'll do is hit the digital link, many cases, to whether it be responding to push advertising, TV, radio, they'll land on a site, or going through and doing a search, going to a favorite store, looking for a particular item, going in and then patronizing a store. And then you look at it from there. The other part that's interesting is you flip it to where people will go in, and we see this with Macy's recently, where there's been a really clear statement. A lot of the activist investors have been pushing to break the company up into a digital and into a brick and mortar, really citing the valuation of a digital operation. Their CEO has been very firmly against that. I commend that in a sense that they've gone forward stating that the stores actually provide a demand generation capability. So in this case, really putting the brand out there, pushing to get people shopping where there just isn't the digital space available in a lot of cases. So it's an interesting part. We're now seeing the physical used to actually push digital consumption, and then digital to go in and look physical. So one, pushing people, showing them this inventory, bringing them into the stores, and then the in-store experience where you're going through and looking at specifically what goes in inside a store. So I think we see the real blending of the channels that go in more and more across the board. So I'd say it's definitely not a zero-sum game. And as we've seen, you've shown with the winners that are out there, clearly the winners are embracing that strategy to really think holistically about the company, the customer, through all the aspects of the journey in multiple different channels.
You know, it's interesting. I'm reminded of 2015 when the people in my side of the industry, the analysts and the press, were talking about the retail apocalypse and talking about the demise of the stores, and people were dumping their stock in real estate and those kinds of things because the store was dead. It's never going to recover. And then some retailers suddenly realized that the store was actually the differentiator. And again, I applaud Walmart in this regard. Walmart's CEO was very clear on this. I think in 2016 in their annual report, when they were discussing it with analysts, he said that they were going to invest heavily in new technologies in the store related to omnichannel fulfillment because they believed in the power of the store. And now, of course, the rest of the industry has come along. Ashley, let me ask you the question in a real broad sense. So what are you seeing? You know, I shared with you some of the things that I'm seeing or RSR is seeing, but how about you? What are you seeing in the industry today? There's that mute button. We'll wait. All right. Gary, I'm going to kick it over to you because Ashley's looking for a mute button. Same question.
So,
back.
Oh, she's back. Go ahead, Ashley.
Okay, Ashley, you're on.
No, sorry, you guys. Yep, thank you. I was off mute but couldn't hear you. But so I agree. It's certainly not a zero-sum game, right? And what we've seen is that online-only retailers are starting to open physical stores, and we're seeing that when you go to a buy online, pick up in store location, where is it? It's at the back of the store because they know they can add to the basket. So there's certainly room in the category to grow. But I think what retailers have realized is that what's important about the stores is bringing it back to the basics, having the inventory where the shoppers want it, being able to locate it, and having confidence that they can get that inventory to the shopper when they want it and where they want it, which is why, you know, when Brian was talking about the blending of those channels, if it's not in the store, that store should be able to tell that shopper where it is at or how they can get it delivered to them. So that blending is important. And I think the other thing is retailers are going through a real estate rationalization where they're not just looking at the physical store and the physical shopper, but how it's an extension of their supply chain. And we've seen a lot about different retailers using it as a mini fulfillment hub. But I think the store is definitely still an advantage, and it's not, you know, an apocalypse, and it's not going away. It just needs to be used appropriately in today's omni-channel world.
Well, Gary, this does bring us back to you because you mentioned in the beginning of localization, and a theme has cropped up here, and one is the ability to reliably expose inventory to be sold, whether it's in the digital space or some other space. But first of all, let me get your general thoughts. What do you think is going on in retail? Is it in good shape, or is it in a huge transition, or something in between those 2 points?
I think actually the two aren't contradictory, and I would say yes to both, to be honest. It is in good shape, and I do see us in really at a nexus right now. There's a lot of change going on. I think, when you talk about one thing that the data has screamed from a number of sources is that customers who are active on multiple channels are far more valuable to a retailer over their lifetime than folks who either just engage at the store or just engage digitally. So to concur with Bryant, the more that you can connect that digital and the in-store experience, the more compelling your brand is and your value proposition is. And I would add, as long as you're consistent in those experiences, you have an opportunity to win there. But I think, I like what you said earlier, Brian, about nodes within more of an omni-channel ecosystem. And I've been thinking a lot lately with, the work that we do with looking at, local data and trying to connect customers to stores and digital. And we've talked a lot, and I've been speaking about the halo effect. And if I've got a store, how is that influencing digital sales around us? And what that's really made me think is we need to really start thinking more about looking at markets holistically, far more holistically than we've done in the past. And I'd kind of like to see the whole old retail metric of comp store sales growth sort of go away, because I don't think it's very good anymore. Because now you've got to think about, we now understand that all of our stores and our digital presence and our digital customers within a given market are all interacting with us, and they're interacting with the competitors, and they're interacting with a lot of different things that are going on in that market. So if we want to be able to really drive overall incremental growth, there's different levers that we're going to have to adjust across these different channels. And just looking at one store and then one store and then one store is it's kind of an old school way of doing it. So I think when I look at the retailers like Target and like Walmart, who, during the pandemic, now they had an advantage, not just because they were able to stay open, but I think their bigger advantage is that they had been investing in some of these capabilities prior to the pandemic. So what we found is it's a lot easier to extend something that's already in process than it is to, start from scratch. On the other hand, I also think that, for some of those retailers who found themselves, who didn't have a strategy in place, now they have some examples they can learn from. So I think it's really going to be an evolving space. And I think the answer is pretty clear that you have to have a compelling value proposition across multiple channels.
We'll talk a little bit about that. I want to point out something that you've all just briefly touched on, and that's the power of information. So I mean, I could go on and on and on about this, but I'd be displaying my own prejudices if I did that. For the audience that doesn't know me, I'm a recovering CIO, so I have that point of view. But what strikes me is that we're talking about a more of a sense and respond type of a business than we've talked about in the past. The retail is very transactionally driven. If you sell one case pack of Coke last week, you're likely to sell a case pack of Coke this week too. And that's the way we tended to think about it. But you're talking about being able to sense something as it's occurring and then responding in something closer to real time. So Brian, I want to go back to you for just a second about that, because one of the big challenges in the digital space is that, again, it goes back to that ubiquity. You don't necessarily know who you're talking to at the beginning of a discussion. It's very different than a store when you can actually look at a customer, and a customer can look at you. So how important in your view is it to, I guess it sounds like a leading question, but explain what you think is the important aspect of recognizing the customer's need early in the journey and why you think that's important.
I think it's extremely important. You look at it and you take, for example, what I would say some of the marquee experiences that users have working with brands. You think of a Nordstrom, you think of others where service is so intertwined with the entire experience. Someone walking in and literally knowing someone's taste, asking them a question, even seeing the subtle clues that are not explicit as to where a person goes in and shops. So we take that into the digital domain, and in our view, certainly, and I am biased, this is a problem we've worked hard to solve, but it's been one that we looked at, is to go in and look at intent. So there's certain levels of intent to understand the intent, not just buy versus browse, but really intent why someone's there. So for example, someone going into a sporting goods store or going into a sporting goods store front, searching on a particular item or showing and expressing an interest in a particular item. We can see based on someone within a matter of a simple click, are they looking at golf clubs? We can look at the price point. We can see the price propensity, whether there is somebody who might be really focused on brand or dollars. All those clues based on what goes in, you get to a point where you can get a cascading profile similar to when someone walks into a store. You can gauge by what they've picked up. Maybe they're brand loyal, maybe they shop on the high end, maybe they shop for value. You can see all these particular items and use that to customize the experience. So for example, in a search area, you would go in if you're looking at golf and someone says, yeah, I'd like to get a set of balls. Well, in this case, you could tell it's golf balls versus in the case of going in and someone looking at tennis or someone going in and looking at other items. We get the context. What's interesting is we B2C retail, just like a store, there's no workup of a person when you walk in. They're really generally not going in and saying, well, this person's bought this in the past. The same thing online. We go in, most people are browsing anonymously, and with Apple getting real strict on what data can get shared, Google doing the same, we're finding a point where it's important to look at each user uniquely, but yet at the same time model those behaviors and understand it to where you can tailor that experience based on many of those particular indicators that will be out there.
That's interesting, yeah, because of course we're all online to do one thing, is to solve a problem. And now I'm going to switch to the role of the retailer. Of course, as a retailer, the job is to recognize demand and fulfill it. So Ashley and Gary, you both mentioned inventory. I want to drive in on that because we know from our studies that retailers have been trying for 12 years to create inventory visibility across the enterprise. And it's a really tough challenge. And Gary, you've got the sin of knowledge, so I'm going to start with you on this one because you were a retailer for so long. Why is inventory visibility and accuracy so doggone hard to fix?
Well, I'm thinking again earlier in this discussion, Brian, you mentioned this idea that value is simply availability and cost, and I agree with the rejecting that, with the caveat that even in my Target days, we sort of felt. And each item had different roles to play, but on certain items, be it milk or be it some core basic items, we always figured we had 2 chances to be out of stock before the customer would walk and not come back. So I think it's important that what are those key items that are those kind of decision points for the customer, and whether it's online. I mean, there's nothing more frustrating than going through an online exercise on your iPhone to put together a shopping list and then find out that a quarter of the items are not available, right? So being able to and with that, being able to be nimble in your supply chain and to Ashley's point, having that visibility across your enterprise, but not just having the visibility, but also being able to fulfill demand. I think a customer is going to be a lot more forgiving to find out that it's just going to be a day late rather than to say, sorry, we can't get you ibuprofen today.
Yeah, I think that's true. Well, Ashley, that does bring us right over to you because, and I think you've seen some of the previews of the data that we've been pulling out of our survey, but inventory visibility and accuracy are still number one. It's still the number one business objective. What in your view is causing retailers to have to let's put it this way, to struggle so much with that problem?
Absolutely, and they do. And the reality is that inventory is the key to a retailer's business. So connecting the demand with the supply is so very important, but it's difficult, and it's only become more difficult as there's more ways to fulfill that bi-directional connection between buy online, curbside, ship from store. And so keeping track of the visibility and the accuracy has become more difficult for retailers, but it's become more important for retailers to make sure that their customers are delighted. And as Gary said, you only get a couple of chances with out of stocks before the customer is going to go to your competition and might not come back. And so the importance is just heightened ever so recently. And I think retailers have to look at how do they achieve that visibility. Obviously at Impinj, RAIN RFID has been adopted, and the momentum has been really going around the inventory accuracy and visibility use case. And you brought up, Brian, at the beginning, Walmart coming out and talking about that, but other retailers like Nike saying it's the most important tool in their arsenal because of the ability to link together across not only the stores, but the supply chain what do we have, where is it, and then how can we connect our shoppers to it when they want it in real time. So I agree that inventory visibility and accuracy, even coming out of COVID, is such a priority for retailers.
Yeah, it strikes me that what we're trying to do here is we're trying to, on one side, we digitize the customer experience. Brian, that's your business. That's what you help to accomplish. And on the other side, we have a very, very physical model where things move across wide physical spaces. And we have to somehow be able to get those two things, bits and atoms, to work together. And a big part of that is what in RSR we think of as IoT, or digital twins, if you prefer that word. The whole ability to be able to observe a physical thing in a digital way so that you can analyze it and get it closest to the point where demand is going to request it. So it's a huge change. You just brought up something fascinating, though. You're talking about looking into the supply chain. And of course, COVID made that really important. I have a story from our own personal life. We ordered some new shutters for our house. We needed to replace them, and we ordered them last September. Gentleman came out to the house and he measured them. We cut the order. We gave him 50%, and then we didn't hear anything for a long time. So around December, we called the company up. We said, "Where are our shutters?" And they said, "Well, it's somewhere on the Pacific." And then we waited another couple of weeks, and they said, "Where are our shutters?" And they said, "It's at Long Beach." And then we waited another couple of weeks. We're well into January now, and we said, "Where are our shutters?" And they said, "Down at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean," because the container had fallen off the ship. It would have been much better if we'd known that in October than if we'd known it in January, because the corrective action might have been the same, and but we would have had our expectations set properly. Now, do we blame the retailer for that? No, I certainly don't. I know how this happens. But one of the things I did think of is next time I'm going to try to find a retailer for these kinds of things that can actually see into the supply chain. Brian, on the digital side, I'm going to ask you the question. Are you noticing that customers want to be able to reach? Do they want to have visibility back into close to the source of the products? Is that interesting to consumers?
Yeah, I think altogether, anything you think about the experience, certainly your experience of having goods at the bottom of the ocean, and we've had some, certainly I see that with some people looking for their cars. I mean, altogether, this goes into a lot of it's going in with areas with order management systems and others, all the e-commerce activities. There's absolutely that availability. Certainly, as we're going to see challenges on that, certainly COVID and rebooting the economies created that, and that's just always been the case in areas where there's a matter with just in time as we shift into it. Customers, one, there is a convenience of getting something there when you need it, but even when you go in, you're planning on something custom, it's absolutely a need to go in and customer. So we've seen that. We've certainly gone in. These are areas we've addressed as well, where customers going in and providing that data, and in this case, having retailers look at it and provide that visibility into when things would be available, where things are available, replacements that are out there. That's been a big area we've gotten into, certainly on some of the larger, whether it be B2B commerce or some of the larger retailers with large catalogs, is, okay, we don't have this product, but we can make a recommendation at this point where something happens to be in at this point based on similarities or based on a customer's taste. At the same time, using data where there's not just inventory availability, but also lead time and supply chain where that happens to go in. So at least being able to set the expectation of as part of that digital experience.
Gary, this gets over to you, and I'll use myself as a guinea pig. I saw you nodding your head a second ago, but on yet another purchase that I recently made, it says, click on the link to find out where your product is. Sure. And it had shipped from someplace on the East Coast, and it said it's in transit and expected to arrive on Monday or something like that. I want to know if it's in Illinois or if it's in Nebraska or Idaho or Southern California. I want to know where it is. And I was thinking as I was being frustrated how much our expectations as consumers have changed. I now expect to be able to see my item as it traverses its way across the country. Is that a use case that's driving adoption of geolocation?
Absolutely. So you talked about digital twin. We have a lot of customers and interest in building a digital twin of their entire supply chain, exactly for what you described, Brian. And I think this is something where both Brian, Ashley, and I, if we ever get together over a cup of coffee, would probably have a lot to talk about. how do we track, we talk a lot today about, from source to end user, and being able to see from raw materials to manufacturing all the way through. All of this is available, and it all is becoming more and more important. I think in my own experience, I ordered something as simple as some, Tide Pods, and what I didn't know is that the company was fulfilling them was in Toronto, not in the US. And this was about a month ago. And guess what? They were stuck for a month in the whole the trucker thing that was going on. And I just had no idea. And I got really upset about that. Had I seen on a map where these things were coming from, or if I had been able to understand, do you know that you're ordering something that you could just go down to Target and buy, or because I was promised the next day delivery. But if I can see and track all of that and understand at the order level, I mean, we're getting to the point, Brian. I mean, we talk about personalization and localization. I honestly, years ago, never thought we'd get to personalized supply chains. And that's kind of where we're going, where each of our customers has their own little supply chain. And we're, as a retailer, responsible for providing them goods and updating them and showing them where stuff is.
I was just thinking about that, is that the fact that that both of you just said in different ways that the consumer wants to see inside of the supply chain. I was joking sometime in the middle of last year when the news media was screaming about supply chain woes. I was thinking, when was the last time I heard a consumer talk about a supply chain? And that's the inner game of retail, and I didn't think we'd ever talk about that stuff publicly. But it's gotten very interesting to consumers. They want to know where their products are. Ashley, I want to turn the attention to you, because when I think of RFID, I've traditionally thought of RFID as something that helps retailers or their suppliers see the flow of goods or see merchandise inside of a physical space, the physical four walls. Is there an application for RFID in this let's call it 100% supply chain visibility, and what would have to happen for that to occur?
Absolutely. And in fact, we see some retailers starting their journey with RFID in the supply chain versus the store. Right. And the reality is that once an item is tagged with RFID, it can be read at any point in the supply chain, in the store, or even in returns coming back to the store. So the difficulty isn't in actually having your supply chain RFID enabled. It's not that difficult of a process once items are tagged, because again, you can read it at the dock doors, you can read it going through tunnels, or just in general from an inventory perspective. And we're definitely seeing retailers wanting to better understand what they do have in real time inside of any part of their supply chain, from manufacturing all the way to distribution centers. And in a lot of ways, while inventory accuracy can be improved, of course, with RFID in the supply chain, so can speed. And that's become a big deal with retailers and supply chain. Automating it so it speeds up and there's accuracy means retailers can save money on how their labor performs, how long their labor is, and some retailers even going to dark supply chains because they can automate it that much. So supply chains and really turning those into part of their digital transformation strategy, we definitely see retailers heading in that direction.
That's so interesting. Again, this goes back to an opening statement I might have made, and that's that we've done a lot to digitalize the customer. That's called the front door of the store, through the e-commerce or the mobile channel or through social media. We've done a tremendous amount of work there. Still a tremendous amount of work to be done. But on the other side of the business, it's been largely a physical thing. And but consumers, I'm going back to you and what you said, Brian. Consumers want to see that, and that demands digitalization of some of that information. So or equivalence of the product. And Gary, of course, you talked about the fact that it's not just stopping at the inbound dock of the DC. They want to see all the way back. They want to get all the way back to the source. And actually, just again, another full disclosure, at RSR, we've been hearing interesting comments from companies trying to be able to provide that information from the perspective of sustainability and environmental consciousness as a pre-buy value attribute in the e-commerce space. So they want to be able to see, whether or not the garment they're going to buy is being made reliably from an ethical source. Those kinds of things, and that brings up all kinds of interesting issues. You know, we only have a couple of minutes left, and I don't want to. This is exciting, and I could talk about this for hours. One of the things we haven't talked about is the role of technology, the role of AI in particular. And one of the implications in all of your offerings is that you use advanced data analytics to arrive at actionable information very quickly. We're not going to get a chance to talk about that today. I'm going to ask you a more general question. We've been talking about great things. But the question is, are retailers really ready to address these things?
I would say that if you would have asked me 3 years ago when retailers are going to adopt omni-channel, I would have said this just seems to be sort of it's just a slow trog, and they have to see the value. And I think what COVID did was customers demanded the things that they tried to that they wanted, and I think that's what's happening with a lot of the things that we're talking about today. I think that the customers have had a taste of what they can get. I think they're demanding, like they want the supply chain, they want to know where stuff is. So I think the future is bright, and we'll see a lot of things. A lot of the things we're talking about, adoption is going to go very, very quickly.
Hi, Gary. Were you vamping while I fell off the end of the earth?
Might have been. I was answering your question. I was like, having produced a number of these, Brian, I'm like, well, this is a lot of dead air.
Yeah, no,
Got it. Picked it up good, Gary.
And you know me personally, you know that dead air is not my friend. So
it's nobody's friend, believe me.
So what did I miss? So who's next? Gary, I
was Brian or Liz, I would guess, or I'm sorry, Brian or Ashley.
Let's start with you, Ashley. I asked a question, are retailers ready to do this before I fell off the earth? Are they ready?
Yes, they are ready. I think, as we talked about already, you know, COVID definitely exposed weaknesses, specifically around omni-channel and supply chain for retailers. And what became clear is that the retailers who were ready survived and thrived, and they were able to transform to curbside pickup. They were able to make their associates go from, you know, point of sale to pick and pack overnight. And that really, I think, exposed retailers to understand what they need to do, and in turn invest in the solutions that bridge the physical and digital worlds in order to meet the shopper where they want to be met. And I think what's interesting and what we're definitely seeing is that they're going back to the basics, but the basics today require digital tools, real-time information and insights that can go directly to the retailer, to the associates, and as we just talked about, to the shopper. Because I think as a shopper myself, we all have expectations around what we can see and what information we can get provided in real time. So I actually think the momentum to do it is there for retailers, and I think they're ready. I think it's going to go a lot quicker in the next couple of years than we've seen even in the past couple of decades.
That's fascinating. Well, and I want to take it to Brian. Brian, in the study that we did on the next generation of e-commerce, we said that we were on the cusp of a reinvestment in the whole e-commerce suite because things had changed so dramatically in the retail space. Is it your view that retailers are ready to do that, to take that step?
I think certainly it's a mix. I think they need to. It's an imperative that they absolutely need to. And the leaders, some have done it. They've spent more pathfinding and going through from there. Others work with organizations like us where we democratize AI, and certainly the item is bringing it in. I think they're ready from certainly the partners are there, vendors are there, processes are there, the approaches are there. It's really the willingness and understanding the imperative to go through and change. And it'll certainly go in, it'll bring out, is the data ready in a format? Is the overall platform from e-commerce ready and at this point going to take orders? Is the data providing inventory information and other parts? So as we look at upgrading the overall experience, there's a certain readiness checklist per se that they need to go through. But it's really a case, I think if COVID certainly went through and highlighted it, those that did well, did very well. And we look at it as well, Amazon's overall gross merchandise value went up. What they processed through their platform, their share did not. And that's really the hype that I looked at from when I saw the data coming out in COVID, that a lot of retailers did well. that they were able to go in and maintain their brand and maintain their customers. So I think that it's a case where the industry is absolutely ready and needs to embrace modernizing and really embracing the omni-channel or the unit channel as it would be.
This kind of gets us to how we started. What are the things that retailers need to do right now? And what I'm hearing is, first of all, they need to embrace these new types of data because it gives them visibility into their business, either on the selling side or the buying side, and that the technologies are there to help them. And certainly the partners are there to show them how to do it. What we would also say from our research is that it's important for all retailers to know that overperformers, those that we call winners in our studies, are already doing these things. So it's not like we're talking about net new stuff. For example, when Ashley talks about RFID, of course, RFID has been around for a long time, but the acceleration in RFID at the item level is really pretty impressive in the last few years. And geolocation data, as we said, Gary, in the beginning, 5 years ago when we talked about geolocation analytics, or I think we called it geolocation intelligence, most retailers really didn't know what we were talking about. In your case, Brian, we're talking about the next generation of e-commerce, which we've called, because we're that kind of a company, we call it version 3 of e-commerce. Retailers get that, they understand that, even though their last round of investment was really 5 to 7 years ago, relatively short space of time. So our sense is that that change is accelerating and that retailers are ready to do it. The overperformers, as I guess we should expect, are on top of it already. We're kind of at the end of our time, and I've asked around a lot of questions around these issues here. Are there any things that you wished I'd asked about that I didn't? So I'll start with you, Ashley.
No, Brian, I think this has been a very fruitful conversation, and I appreciate being able to hear from such great retail minds about what's going on in the industry. And all I can say is I honestly look forward to where retail is going over the next couple of years. It's really exciting. I have a lot of passion for it, and I think there'll be a lot of opportunity for retailers that, in turn, the shoppers will be, delighted and continue. So appreciate the time, Brian.
Well, it's fun. Well, and I think I heard Gary say he's going to buy us all a cup of coffee. So, Gary, how about it? Where are we going to have coffee?
Well, we'll find. I'll be in San Diego in July. You can all come join us in this week in July with the 17,000 of our closest friends at our user conference. But
there you go.
No, Brian, thank you for hosting. This is great, and it was great to meet everybody. My parting words as the wizard, as the old guy here, is that really, these retail, you guys, there's so much data coming in, so much kinds of disparate data, and really understand the trick is to understand what's important and what doesn't actually inform actions that meet your customers' needs. And if you focus there, you'll be on the right path.
Well, that leads us to Brian. Brian, I would love to have another conversation with you and some of our closest friends in the industry to talk about how technology can really help. You mentioned AI more than once. Of course, it's in your branding now, and I'd love to get into more of a discussion about that, especially as it relates to understanding the consumer's intent. I agree with you that you cannot deny the fact that consumers are going to begin their journey in the digital space because it's there. It's how they operate their lives. We can't as an industry, let the value proposition be reduced to price and availability. It has to be better than that. And a lot of things that you're doing in the industry, I think, are going to help retailers have that point of differentiation. But again, one last question for you. Are there any things that you wished I had asked about that I didn't get to?
Yeah, I think it's certainly the good opportunity to go in deeper on it. I think you did certainly good areas to look at, and I mean, rather than an area you didn't probe into, I think from a level we go into AI, digital, and really the data aspect. And Gary, you keyed onto it as well. There's a ton of data out there. It's not a desert of data. It's a case where it's actually a deluge of data that we're dealing with. So that's where the AI and components get intelligent and really go in. AI, we have going in compared to saying it's all about availability, it's all about findability. Those things are important, but it's about finding the right things, making certain the right things are there, and being able to listen into all those sorts of pieces of data and make sense of that. And that's where So we can go a lot deeper. We've done quite a bit on that part on research. And that's where we continue to drive a lot of our innovation is what signals can we get? What sense can we get out there? And we've been dealing with the digital channel, but it certainly doesn't stop there. As we look at it from what we've seen, there's the in-person, there's a lot of other signals that are out there. So what can we do to make sense of that to one, give the shopper an amazing experience, but the other part is really to go back deeper in a supply chain, go back into demand forecasting and a lot of items from there, taking all the data signals and being able to provide not just insight for the browser and the buyer, but also insight for those shopping, their associates and the others that are in there. And it's certainly a whole other discussion too, is the evolution of the associate, the evolution of what the store is and the footprint of the store and the purpose of it is. It's certainly changing. There's no question about it. And I think we're going to see it continue to accelerate as organizations and stores start to build and come back in with retail. But I'm bullish on retail. I think altogether the transformation is there. Like you, I looked at it in 2019. We talk about the retail apocalypse and look at it, and boom, it's not the case. It was a little bit of thinning of the herd in some cases, but the ones that have come out strong are absolutely doing well and embracing these technologies.
Well, I think I hear two subjects for two more What Now discussions. I'd love to have you back, but the first one is digital transformation. What does it mean for retail? I'm hearing a lot about that in your conversations. And the other one, we'll save it for another day. We'll talk about the new workforce and what has to happen in retail for that. This has been great. And the other thing that happened today that was really wonderful is we now have recorded for all posterity what it looks like when a webinar gets interrupted by primitive technology. So there, 20 years from now, we'll look at it and go, man, how did we put up with this?
How do we do that?
Anyway, thank you so much, Gary, Ashley, Brian. Thank you so much. It was great. And Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you to say goodbye.
Yeah, no, thank you everyone for hanging in there with us. Apologize for the very brief moment of technical difficulty we had there, but by the time you hear this recording, that will hopefully be edited out. And if you did sign up for this, feel free. We'll send a link along probably within a day or two. You can share it with anyone that you would choose to. Like everything that we do, it is available for free, as is our research. If you're interested in reading any of it, you'll notice on the screen here, these are ways you can get in touch with us via Twitter. We don't do a lot there, but you can try it if that's your preferred mode of communication. There's Facebook, there's LinkedIn, where we are pretty active. And then there's direct lines for both Brian and myself, as well as our other partner, Paula, and our Director of Business Development, Linda Wolf. So thank you everyone for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody. It was really good.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.